Good evening. Welcome to the school committee. We're going to have the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge of Allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The next item on the agenda is Chairperson's remarks. I don't have very many because we have a big agenda tonight, and the agenda will speak for itself. The next is oral communications from the public. To receive oral communications from members of the public may address the committee for up to 3 minutes, longer with the permission of the chairperson. The committee will not engage in a discussion on topics raised during public comment, but may choose to add the topic to a future agenda. This agenda segment will be limited to 15 minutes unless extended at the discretion of the chairperson. Mary, if you could say your name, what town you're from, please.
Okay, there we go. Hi, everyone. My name is Mary Anastasio. I've chatted with you guys before. I live at 17 Longbrook Road over in Byfield, just basically around the corner. So, Triton, our core values, right? Respect, integrity, excellence for all. I think that's what we all want and what we all believe in. And that's what we really want for our children. The reason why I'm speaking this evening is to advocate for our kids and also for our parents' rights, our rights to choose, okay? So every day we make lots of decisions, and if there's sex education in our schools, we need to sign off on that. So there's lots of minor decisions, major decisions, and I think the involvement from the parents is something that we in Triton and maybe across the state is missing. I do have 4 items that I just would like for some follow-up. We did have a vaccine clinic. I was wondering what the participation numbers look like. I did also email Brian in the HR department with regards to the vaccine status and how we're going to track that, keep that information personal and just for like numbers for that reference point, which of course is there now at our 80%. One thing that I have a question about is what does that 80% look like? Is there a reward at the end of that? Does that mean that we don't necessarily have to have our kids wear masks in school? So that's kind of a question that I have. And specifically, going through the FAQs from last year, the close contacts for kids, what does that look like in the classroom? Does that close down a classroom or not? I want to close with 4 words that I've been called personally. I've been called a sheep. I've been called an anti-vaxxer, which is kind of strange, right? You would think if you're a sheep, you can't be an anti-vaxxer. I've also been called a Trumpster, and I've also been called a libtard. So back to the core values of Triton: respect, integrity, and excellence for all. I think that we can look forward to a great 21-22 school year. Hopefully COVID, we can get under wraps and we can move forward in a productive way. So I look forward to those answers, and thank you for your time.
Thank you. Mr. Moran?
Jim Moran, 104 Elm Street. I want to address 2 issues: masks on the children and sports. I don't believe children in elementary school need to be wearing masks. And I know that's very controversial, and I'm sure there'll be much discussions about that tonight. But when you look at, will they get sick? What's the risk? And you integrate into some common sense, you may come to the conclusion, and many parents have, that masks are not very beneficial. The kids won't get sick. Probably none of them will die. And the mortality rate with children in elementary school due to COVID would probably be less than with the kids passing away from the common flu. So that's my thoughts on it. I know it's extremely controversial, and I'm just asking you to take that in extreme considerations, and that you revisit it every week or 2 in September and October and November as necessary to make the modifications in the best interest of the kids. And the second thing is sports. I believe that one of the best things from the past year that's happened with Triton is the sports program, although somewhat modified, have continued at all levels, and all children, whether it's elementary or high school, to get out in the ball field and play has been probably the highlight of their year. Obviously, academics has not been. And again, I hope that continues, and with great success. And I'm here for the children's interest. And this group here is the protector of our children. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anybody else would like to speak?
Chris Fuller, 27 Main Street, Byfield. A parent's right to make health decisions for their child is a natural right. And a natural right is granted by God. It's not granted by government. That's a fundamental principle of our country. It's what we based our Constitution on. So when DESE or some other state bureaucrat or some Fed bureaucrat tells you that you have to put a face diaper on your child to send them to school, we have the right to ignore that mandate because they don't have the right to tell us that in the first place. They're getting in between a decision that is a natural right granted by God, not by government. So last year, you guys had a chance to bring us back to school last year, all right? And you told us over and over again that you wouldn't do it, you couldn't do it, it was impossible, you couldn't break this 6-foot rule, even though DESE told you that you could be within 3 feet of each other. It was only until Charlie Baker got some guts and finally mandated that school be open full-time in person that you guys finally decided to let the kids go to school. And they only got 4 or 5 weeks of school. So I'm saying to you tonight, ignore this mask mandate, just like you ignored the DESE mandate last year, or the DESE advice to go 3 feet. You have the power to do this. Someone on this board needs to get some guts, stand up tonight and say, I want a motion to ignore this mask mandate and make masks optional, and let the parents make the decision whether or not their child has to wear a mask to school. If we put masks on our children today, what's going to happen tomorrow, meaning next year and the year after? It'll just become automatic. You won't even ask permission. It'll become the new norm. okay? And if it's too dangerous to go to school without a mask on, it's too dangerous to go to school it's too dangerous for unvaccinated kids to go to school, so you'll start mandating the vaccine as well. We all know that's where this is heading. Is this the country you guys want? You want a country where people who are unvaccinated and unmasked can't go to work, can't make a living, can't go to school? It starts here. You have the power to do this. So please, someone make a motion to make masks optional this year. You might lose, judging from what I'm seeing here. You don't have the support, but at least you put people on record of a yes or no vote. And please, when it comes time to take the masks off finally, and the high schoolers get to take the mask off, I'm seeing that the plan from DESE says that the elementary school kids will still have to wear them. No. If high schoolers get to take the mask off, then so do the elementary school kids, all right? We live in a country where LeBron James can go to work, not wear a mask. Barack Obama can throw a snooty party on Martha's Vineyard with all the pretty people without masks. But our kid has to sit in school with a face diaper on. Can you please
Your time is up, please.
bring some common sense to this? As you can see, COVID science is not settled science.
Huh?
There are many good people
Bob,
out
please
here.
cut his mic.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next item on the agenda is the consent agenda. I'm going to read the donations. A donation of 4 48-inch white plastic square picnic tables with a value of $607.96 were given by the Salisbury PTA to the Salisbury Kindergarten. A donation of 2 aluminum cornhole sets with a value of $135.42 were given to the given by the Salisbury PTA for recess. A monetary donation of $207.14 from the Newburyport Farmers Market was given to Salisbury Elementary to be used towards the cost of students' lunches and snacks. A monetary donation of $86.17 from Stop and Shop Supermarket Company was given to Salisbury Elementary to be used for the Salisbury Elementary School at the principal's discretion.
Can I offer, sorry, too close, one more clarification on something that's in the consent agenda? I feel like I need to step way back. Shocker, Brian's loud. In your packet is 2 approvals for, it is Pine Grove and Salisbury to go to Camp Cody, grade 6. You approved in June, you approved Newbury Elementary going to the same camp. So to confirm, we have always had 2 schools that go in the 6th grade to environmental camp, 1 school that's always gone in the 5th grade. This has provided a very natural break. So all 6th graders will be going to camp this fall together. Great transition for students coming into the middle school. There's also talk about, in the future, keeping it grade 6 and moving it to the spring. So it's one more kind of phase transition to bringing the students together. So this is something, I don't know, we've talked publicly a lot about it. I know I've talked to several of you individually about this. So this is a great change to have all our 6th graders from all 3 elementaries going together to Camp Cody together this year. Just want to make sure this didn't get buried in the consent agenda.
I'll make a motion to approve the consent agenda.
I'll second.
Any discussion? I have one thing. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
I think that's wonderful about all 3 schools going to camp. I think it's a great building for when they come here to Triton. I think I didn't. Yes? Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I think with your double mask, you need it nice and close to your face.
I can probably take one off. All those in favor? Because we don't have to do a roll call vote now. Okay. Next item on the agenda is new business, to consider and approve agenda items proposed for future meetings and any items of an urgent nature to be considered. Paul?
I just would like to discuss at a future meeting whether we stay in person or we stay remote. Before tonight's meeting, I reviewed the June 30th meeting where we discussed the issue, and there just wasn't a whole lot of input from the members, including myself. But just going forward, I'd like to see if we could make that an agenda item, or if we work on it in the workshop, whatever the group thinks.
Yes, we can do that. Erin, did you have a question? The student advisory, there's no report during the summer months. I had already spoken to Kaylee. The next item on the agenda is reports and deliberations. School year opening update.
Okay, over to me. So obviously, big question on everyone's minds is masks. But I think we also should take a look at all the changes that are coming into play as we open up the schools this year. We know how last year went. We know we started remotely, shifted hybrid, went back to remote, came back to hybrid, full in-person return. So I think it's while we ended fairly normally, we left in June with a statement from the department that they said, all restrictions gone, all bets are off, we're coming back normal in September. Obviously, things have changed with the Delta variant. So just wanted to take some time to go through some of the key points that will be impacting us as we open schools. So we're going to take a look at the learning model, updated restrictions and guidelines for this year, some testing options, changes to quarantine and response to positive cases, and then look at some mask requirements that has been a work in progress. We got information yesterday from the Board of Ed, and then right on cue, we got something from the commissioner about 2 hours ago. So this is hot off the press and not a lot of helpful information as far as further clarification. So in regards to the learning model, we were told, and this is quoting from the Department of Ed, that we are not allowed during this coming year to, hey, want copies of that? You can have copies. Sorry, since you can't see it, the bags to that. So we are not allowed to offer remote learning as a learning model. So that means as an option or as a requirement, we are not allowed to offer remote learning as it doesn't meet the time on learning requirements. So that means both the remote model or the hybrid model, which obviously relies on remote learning, cannot be an option that we can offer, again, voluntarily or otherwise. So that has been the mantra since last spring. This past Friday, a Q&A was released, and I quote, only in limited instances where students are isolating and or quarantining, if schools have the ability to allow students to join their schedule remotely, then they may do so. So again, I lost my end quote there, but that is a full quote. That is the first time ever. It was not conveyed anywhere directly to schools. It was just dropped into a Q&A that was posted on the Department of Ed website. So that left everyone scrambling. I know superintendents and principals, how are we going to offer this? So with such late notice, I can tell you right now, we are not set up to be able to offer remote learning for students who are quarantining, whether it be the MOU that we had agreed with our teachers last spring, or just the basic mechanics and structure of having the technology back up and running and ready to offer remote instruction. We are not able to do that at this point in time. That doesn't mean it can't be a discussion in the future, but at this point in time, we are not able to do that. You can see there's about 1,300 Chromebooks behind you stacked that are in the process of getting refreshed and ready to go back out. But we at this point are not ready. I did poll all of my peers in the Cape Ann League on the North Shore, and everyone is taking the same approach. Not that people don't want to offer a remote option. It is a good option for some, and I think there's lots of success stories where families that chose remote actually had a phenomenal year. But optional or otherwise, we are not allowed to offer it wide scale, and on a case-by-case basis, we're not set up to be able to do that, as we just learned we could do 5 days ago. So we'll talk later about the test and stay program, but with that test and stay program, it's going to greatly reduce the number of individuals who are quarantining. So that will certainly help so that we don't have whole classrooms out and needing to be able to get in remotely. So for now, what we're able to do is just like any other absence, if a student was out sick, it's an excused absence, and we would provide daily work for those students to make up. Obviously, for older students, the use of Google Classroom is going to be much more integrated at the elementary level. I expect there still will be a lot of use of Google Classroom because it's become the norm, but it wouldn't be remoting into the classroom live. At this point, I would say it doesn't appear that there is any movement by DESE on this, but I know the question has been asked, what about an outbreak? What about if case counts rise? What about if the Delta variant continues to move forward in the same trajectory? Certainly, this is subject to change, right? We learned at 3:30. I'll talk about that a little bit, about what we learned regard to the mask requirement, but there was really no further clarification whatsoever. So this could all be subject to change. If we did truly see an outbreak, I would be far more concerned with safety, and just like I have the ability to close a school for a snow day and tack a day on the end, I certainly wouldn't hesitate to do that, but there is no current ability for me to offer remote learning and allow that as a remedy. So someone had a hand. Paul, did you have a hand?
So Brian, I just had a question. You used the term test and stay. Have we gotten materials before tonight's meeting that explain the test and stay, or is that part of your PowerPoint?
That's part of the PowerPoint. You should have a copy of the slides.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
So we'll talk about that. Yep. So this is all, I will say, this is all happening this week. So that's the nature of the lateness of you getting this information. The other caveat, and this is a challenge, so there is always a home and hospital option. So when we have students who are medically unable, again, not preferring, but are medically unable per a doctor's certification, are unable to be in the school setting, then we do offer home-based or hospital-based services. So that is still on the table. So with a physician certification, and this needs to be long-term, it can't be for a few days here, a few days there, it's a 2-week plus, 14 school days or more, then we would work through the principal, and largely, more often than not, that ends up coming through as a special education service. Generally, those students are on an IEP for the nature of their disability. But it doesn't have to be directly through special education. But if there is someone who is documented unable to be in school, then we would provide home services. So any other questions about remote learning options, impacts from that, fallout from that? I'm going to jump into what the schools will look like.
Should a student test? No.
Keep it a little closer. You know how Mr. Lathrop is.
Should a student test positive? Are we going to simply require a positive test result, or are we going to require an additional doctor's note as well?
Can I say, hold that question, and I'll get there. Great question, though. Someone else? Paul, did you have a question? No.
Brian, can you just tell us in like 2 sentences why you think it's not possible to teach remotely other than the Chromebooks? Or is it just the Chromebooks?
So our classrooms are no longer set up to be able to have students stream into them. So last year, everything was set. Teachers' focus was teaching students here and there, right? Shifted everyone back at the end of the year. There were still, at the secondary level, students streaming in. It would be far easier at the secondary level. At the elementary level, it's rarely is it a teacher at the front of the room with students sitting in seats, listening to the teacher lecture. So there's multiple reasons. The basic structure of how we've reestablished the classroom as the focus being all the students in the classroom, but there is a nature of we would have to engage the Teachers Association again, as that's a significant change in working conditions. So again, that doesn't mean we can't. I don't think that they would rebuff the opportunity to have a conversation, but at this point we're not set up to do that. So I'll go on. Okay, so in regards to the safety measures, general restrictions, as I noted earlier, all distancing requirements have been lifted by the department. So there is no requirement for a minimum distancing for safety. So the words they used is encourage distancing as feasible, but again, without impacting in-school learning. So what I can tell you is that for the vast, vast majority of the time, we're going to maintain at least that 3-foot distancing. Again, you remember, like, take a typical elementary classroom. We had maximized distancing, all students facing in the same direction, no teacher tables, no real good instructional setup. So we're now changing that, and will allow, say, the teacher table, where a teacher is working with 3 students individually, but we're going to maintain the distances. They're going to have masks on, but that's an important structure to make sure that instruction is happening effectively. At the high school level, there may be group work. Again, let's keep the distance wherever we can. And the real reason is, so the more, when we talk about the close contacts, anyone who is in school at least 3 feet away and with a mask does not have to quarantine if there's a positive. So there is absolutely value in maintaining that 3-foot distancing. So I can tell you we're going to do everything we can to maximize that distancing, but it is not a requirement through the state. So as of we know, as of yesterday, and then further clarified tonight, there is a state mandate that is a requirement that all individuals mask within the school buildings. That is a K through 12. The reason it's not preschool through 12 is because of the fact that Department of Ed does not have authority over those children under age 5, because their K through 12 ESC manages early childhood. So I think it's probably very likely that you'll see something out of ESC similarly, and we'll talk about that in a little bit with regard to masks. So as I mentioned, the classroom layout, again, is going to be much more return to normal. It will not be normal. We still don't have tables, especially at the elementary level, kindergarten, first grade. You're used to a lot of grade levels. You're used to going into a classroom and students are seated 4 to a table, working collaboratively. We're still going to be in desks, but we have more opportunity to get students to work together by having that flexibility, but again, maximizing the 3 feet where we can. We do still have all the tents. They are excellent. Kyle made a great choice. So all the tents, even through last week's horrible hurricane. I saw one of the flaps breeze a little bit on one of the days. So even with the 3-mile-an-hour winds, they withstood that. So we are good. The tents are all there. They are ready to have the chairs and seats returned back to them, especially here at this campus. So we're going to maximize the use of that. I think those became more popular as the year went on as an opportunity for outdoor learning space as well as lunch. Obviously, we spent a lot of time talking about the HVAC upgrades last year. None of us more than Kyle and Chris Walsh and the gang, but all of that work that was done has been maintained. Unit ventilators, vents re-cleaned. So all of that work is still intact. All of the airflow that we talked about in exchange rates is still intact. So there is nothing that we changed from last year going into this year. We're maintaining that same expectation. And again, any area where we didn't have an exchange rate of at least 4 changes per hour, we had a portable HEPA filter in those locations. So for breakfast and lunch, again, there is no distancing requirement from the department. The recommendation is to try to maintain at least 3 feet of distancing, again, because of just even if it was just the simple factor of not having to amass numbers of close contacts in those cases. But I can tell you that for the elementary, we are able to fit all grade levels in the cafeterias and individual seats, just like they were last year in the spring, in maintaining 6 feet, 5.5 to 6 feet of distancing. So at the elementary, no interruption to the schedule. It will be similar to the way it was. Individual tables, depends on the school, the use of the different tables, but students sitting individually separated 6 feet apart. And so that will be very similar, or be exactly like it was in the spring. The middle school and the high school, you know that we had a lot of discussion about the change in the schedule. The block schedule was an hour-and-a-half block schedule that we put into place to minimize contact and all of those aspects that we talked about at great length last year. So that block schedule is not in play anymore. So as we transition back to the normal 57, 56, 58, somewhere, something, 58-minute period, thereabouts, students were traveling all the way to the gymnasium to eat lunch in the bleachers. So without that extra buffer in the schedule, that doesn't become as workable. So we're going to maintain the cafeteria, and obviously through the fall with the outdoor seating in the tents, lots of picnic tables outside. So we will definitely be able to maintain the 3-foot distancing. We're still keeping the armchair desks, or whatever the right term for those are, in the cafeteria, so students are sitting individually. We can't maintain 6 feet. It will be between 3 and 6 feet, depending on the lunch. But again, going to maximize that where we can for the coming year. For transportation, this is a federal requirement that all individuals on buses are masked. You know, if you jump on the T or take a bus, or we did a tour yesterday with all our new hires, if you are on a vehicle, a public vehicle, you have to have face covering. So this is for drivers, for students. All individuals will have to have face coverings on. Have to have the windows open at all times, but there is no distancing requirements. So the way the department has issued their regulations, guidelines, whatever their terminology is, as long as masks are on and windows are open, there is no need to contact trace. I personally, we had a discussion with the DRG today, and talking with Kyle and the nurses. That's helpful information to have, to know where students are. They may not be deemed a close contact. So we are going to do assigned seats. It's not going to be first on, last off like it was last year. So you might have had a 6th grader sitting at the elementary, a 6th grader sitting next to a kindergartner, next to a 4th grader. We know how well that worked or didn't work. So it will still be big kids in the back of the bus, little kids in the front. So they'll walk by one another, but we are going to do assigned seats. And that will assist us in making sure that if there is a question, that we do know who was within close proximity. So that is not going to be in place right on the first day. That's going to be a work in progress. Is that a fair way to describe it? Again, we root for everyone to ride the bus. We don't know who rides the bus until we run it for the first week and we see who is actually riding. So that will be a work in progress. No restrictions on activities that have increased respiration. We talked about the performing arts, in general, singing, wind instruments, theater. Mass music educators did come out with some guidelines and recommendations. So they recommend masks, the slitted masks, bell covers, and limiting performances if it's a poorly ventilated area. All the places where especially through the fall with marching band and such, obviously being outside, that's different. But any indoor places, we do have good air change. So the key is not having the practice for 3 hours on end. So we put those safety measures in place, or I would say retained those safety measures. We're going to continue with the routine cleaning. As we went through last year, that certainly backed off. We know a lot more now than we did. Early on, it was no sharing, everything was, we have the hydrostatic or electrostatic fogging machines. We were fogging everything. Obviously, we know now that it is not transmitted through contact. So are we still cleaning and disinfecting? Absolutely, on a nightly basis, but it is not the same regimen, and that had fallen off as we went through the year last year. Going to still continue hand sanitizer, encouraging good hygiene, daily screening for symptoms, still drafting an email to send out a message after decisions are made tonight, reminding parents of the symptoms. If you have any of these, just stay home and call the nurse. So that's certainly going to be something we're going to maintain. As I mentioned, there is no restriction on sharing supplies. Again, we're going to do our best to maintain the distance of at least 3 feet, but we know that the focus is on the air quality and maintaining that, and with masks, so the sharing is not the source of the viral spread. We'll talk about the quarantine process being updated in a few slides, and then also to note that in the nurses, we had a separate nurses in COVID room. It wasn't utilized nearly as much as it needed to be, or it wasn't needed as much as we thought, so those, actually DESE recommended those don't need to be the case. We just need to have a place to be able to isolate anyone who is symptomatic. So we do have that set up. Activities and athletics. Normal without restrictions, just so you know, obviously. The one implication for the fall is we have an indoor volleyball team. So the indoor volleyball team, again, with the mandate, volleyball players will be required to wear masks indoors. Anyone who is playing outdoors, there is no requirement per the state the state mandate, so they would not be required. But as we mentioned, we're talking about the return of sixth grade camp, after school, before and after school programming, kids club, athletics, performing arts are all back as usual, as planned. And obviously, anything we have in place for safety measures continue throughout the day. So whenever there is a school-based activity, the information that we have prevails. So any questions about all of that before we talk about testing?
Marissa?
I have just a couple, Brian, if I could. You mentioned all windows have to be open on the bus. I'm assuming that is windows open on the bus like the end of last year, two per side, 2 clicks per. Okay.
I think we were doing 3 per side.
3 per side?
2 clicks. So it's like, I think, it's bus lingo. It's like, it's 2 or 3 inches. So yeah, and then, again, we looked at that data last year. I think with 5 windows open going 30 miles an hour, it was something like 65 air changes per hour. So certainly with a couple windows open, it's pretty remarkable what it does.
Okay, thank you. And are there going to be seating charts for lunches or assigned seats for lunches?
So yes, we would need that because of contact tracing. Yep, so we still do need to maintain assigned seats. Yep.
Okay, and last question was, I know DESE says over and over in their guidance, they recommend eating outside if possible, or being, when you're unmasked, being outside. Is there any possibility of moving some of the elementary school lunches outside?
Had that discussion much more difficult at the elementary level. Just the seating at the elementary level is more difficult, whereas we have the armchair desks here and had a lot of them. They're not the most comfortable place to eat a lunch, but they're easy to move and set up. Take Pine Grove, for example. We've got huge tables, so there's no way we're moving those in and out on a daily basis. So at this point, no, there isn't a way to do that like we are able to do it at the middle school and the high school.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions on that before we jump on?
I just have a question about lunches at the high school. So they're not going to be assigned seats, like, I'm looking at this code on the table. Are they going to continue, I guess, with these codes as the students move around?
I will get an answer. That was my latest understanding is yes, it will still be the QR codes. That'll still be the same system.
Those, I believe, at lunch,
Yep.
right? Yeah.
So it's not a seating chart per se,
Right.
assigned, you have to sit next to so-and-so, but you do have to scan, yes.
Okay, thanks.
Yep. I'll confirm that.
You had said that we will first revisit on October 1st, but we don't have a meeting until October 13th. Does that mean that we're going to have to we will be adding a meeting in between?
So there's
We wait till after?
So there's a school committee meeting on the 22nd of September. So and we'll talk about masks. At this point, we don't know, right? So we know what the commissioner released today, which is basically what he said yesterday, which is masks are mandated in schools, ages 5 and up. We're going to revisit it on October 1st. Or no, we're going to revisit this, but by October 1st, if a school, students and staff have shown 80% vaccination rates, then there'll be a metric, so for an off-ramp. So for those who are vaccinated, they would be able to remove their masks. I can tell you superintendents have raised at least 4.2 million questions about that. So in the guidance that was released today, they left that wide open. So they basically said it's October 1st, it's 80%, more information coming, but there are still a lot of questions of how we manage that. Most districts that have dealt with giving someone who is vaccinated the ability to take a mask off have done it on the honor system, simply because there's no way currently to be able to track that without collecting that information. So it would be, my guess is that on the September 22nd meeting, that's going to be a big topic. Yeah, good question.
And the second one was, you had said that we can, sorry. So it's along the lines of how we're moving back to first and second lunch.
Yeah.
When we were utilizing both the gym and the cafeteria, we barely had enough room for all of the students comfortably
Yeah.
in one grade. When we introduce only 2 lunch periods, that is working with 2 grades in one limited space. What are we going to do when it's,
I will have to check with Mr. Kelly on that, but I believe that changed as well.
okay.
I don't think there's more than 1 lunch, or more than 2 lunches.
No, exactly, there's only 2.
I believe that has changed as well.
Oh, okay.
I will have to confirm.
Because they just sent out the schedules that,
And there is 2 on that, too?
There's
So they
2 on
had them
this.
all fit in. I'll have to get an answer to that.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yep. So no other questions on that? We jump into testing. Okay, so testing. 3 types of testing being offered by the department. The cost is fully covered by the department. This is all through CIC Health. We actually tested the seniors to go off to prom in the spring. So we had originally partnered with CIC, had some great company, has been phenomenal. Now have a statewide contract to provide all the testing, including personnel support. Still working through exactly what that means, but our lead nurse, Tara O'Keefe, has been in contact with them. We now have access to the portal, getting all set up. So there are 3 types. Symptomatic testing, we were doing that last year. It's the Binax rapid antigen. It's an anterior front of the nose swab each nostril for, I think, 10 seconds. You put it in a little paper foil pack, snap it shut, put it on the counter, watch it for 15 minutes, and it's a rapid antigen test. So when someone is symptomatic, we're able to use those. If they're mild symptoms, is basically if they're severe symptoms, more than likely, the nurse is going to make a nursing decision, right? That's not my field in medicine. They're going to make a nursing decision. But if they're mild symptoms and test negative, they're runny nose and test negative, they're staying. If their fever is starting to go, they've got fever and chills, but they're testing negative, we're still going to have them go home. So I'll get to the symptoms and those that are the more concerning ones. So symptomatic testing, when someone is in school and feeling sick, that's the use of that. It's not someone who's on the outside coming in, can I drop my child off to have a test? They're home, haven't come into school today. This is only for those who are in school and start experiencing symptoms in school. Test and stay, going to talk in more detail about. That's for in-school close contacts, and it's the ability for someone who is asymptomatic to remain in school without having to quarantine. And then routine COVID pooled testing. Does this slide have it? This is a screenshot from DESE. There's a new phrase. Apparently they tested the term pooled testing and it didn't test well, or it didn't poll well, so there's a new term for it. So I can tell you at this point, I'm not recommending we do pooled testing. Even though it's paid for through CIC, talked to many districts that were paying for it last year, and they've just said the participation was not there. So now that it's paid for, many of those who were already doing it are saying it's just, at this point, it's just not worth it because we had such poor participation. And as we talked about last year, if we don't have a large number participating, it's not helpful data. So those are the 3 options. I should put that little correction. So between, I think on the 11th, when this slide was sent out, and the 13th, 2 days later, this said at least 5 days. It now says 7 days. I believe the interpretation is that it's 7 calendar days from the date of exposure. That's the time period. So again, we're approved for all 3 options. I believe I've covered that slide. So the test and stay option. So again, this is for asymptomatic close contacts of in-school cases. This is not child was a close contact for a friend on the baseball team, a town league baseball team, an AAU baseball team. This is not a sibling was diagnosed and I'm a close contact because it's in my home. This is for someone who is asymptomatic, 0 symptoms, and is an in-school close contact. So for those cases, they can remain in school if they agree to take a daily test for 7 days from the date of exposure and remain symptom-free and keep testing negative. anytime that individual becomes symptomatic, or obviously if they test positive, but even if they become symptomatic, we're relying on people to be honest here, if they become symptomatic, that goes out the window and they're treated as a symptomatic close contact and follow the other protocol. So this is just for those who are in school, close contact, not exempted another way, and they take that Binax test for 7 days. So it is not required. This is a consent, and again, working through that process. Nurses are meeting next week to talk about, is it easy to do paper, or there's a CIC portal, very simple portal that parents and guardians can provide consent online. That's certainly the easiest and quickest way, but they're gonna work through what's the best way to get that consent. Again, this is voluntary. That is not required. A parent or guardian can choose to have the child quarantine instead of participating in the test and stay. So again, if they, yes.
So if there's a positive case that's outside of school and a student is implicated as a close contact or a quarantine, that's going to be going through DPH or the state contact tracing system and not through Triton.
Correct, yes. And so that, actually, the public health nurses did confirm that today, right? So if it's coming through the public health nurse and that's how we're finding out about it, they're not eligible for the test and stay because it has to be in school in order for that to be applied. Correct. So again, remain without any symptoms, and they have to wear a mask for those 7 days. Other than eating or drinking, and we actually have to maintain that 3 foot of distancing for any of those folks. Again, receive the negative test each school day. If it will, 7 days spans a weekend, so they need to quarantine over the weekend. Obviously, there's no way for us to enforce that, but they should quarantine over the weekend, and then when they return on Monday, have to resume the negative tests. One of the caveats here is, so if it's a high school student and they're an athlete and they're coming to a practice on a Saturday or a game on a Saturday, the protocol does need to continue over the weekend. So that's one of the questions we have for CIC Health, whereas they're able to provide the personnel resources. And again, I don't have the exact details, but they talked about contracting with a Cataldo ambulance or some other service where we could say, we're going to have that service on site from 7:30 to 8 o'clock on Saturday morning. Anyone who's in the test and stay protocol, make sure you show up early, get your tests so that you can participate in practice on Saturday and Sunday. So working through all those details, but if it happens, it's the full 7 calendar days, and it impacts any school-related activities. If they're just staying home over the weekend, they just need to quarantine. So any questions about the test and stay? Does that make sense? The key, in school, asymptomatic, willing to test. So now to take a look at what is the definition of a close contact. I know there have been some questions about this. So again, close contacts are defined as individuals who have been within 6 feet of a COVID-19 positive individual while indoors for at least 15 minutes during a 24-hour period. So that has not changed. That should look familiar. The while indoors, that is a tweak, but the definition of the close contact is not what has changed. What has changed is how we respond to someone who meets other criteria that is slightly different than that definition of a close contact. So here are 4 straightforward examples or exemptions that an individual can be exempted from following the entire quarantine protocol. So if you meet these exemptions, you don't have to do the test and stay, you don't have to quarantine, you just go on living your life as normal. So any individual who is asymptomatic and fully vaccinated, again, asymptomatic, any individual who was exposed in a classroom and everyone was masked and 3 feet apart. So again, I mentioned that earlier, there's that motivation for us to maintain that 3 feet whenever and wherever we possibly can. Any individuals who are masked on buses when windows are open, again, that will be our standard procedure. So theoretically, we shouldn't have close contacts. We're not going to assume that everyone abides by the rules all the time. So again, we're going to take precaution to make sure we can do tracing as we needed. And then anyone who was diagnosed with COVID-19 in the last 90 days. That is consistent. That has been the case all along. So those are 4 standard exemptions. And again, even if you're a close contact, you're exempted from having to do the test and stay or quarantine if you meet one of those 4 criteria. Any questions on that? Is that straightforward-ish? Yeah? All right. So these are the symptoms, right? The magic symptoms. Now we have 4 in bold and I think 6 others that are serious but not as serious. So, I gotta go back. So anyone, vaccinated or unvaccinated, everyone should stay home if they have any of these symptoms. So if it's the fever, chills or shaking, difficulty breathing or shortness of breath, new loss of taste or smell, muscle aches or body aches. So those are common flu. Obviously, the loss of taste is a COVID specific, as well as the shortness of breath. So the recommendation is if you have any of these symptoms, not multiple, any of them, then the recommendation is to stay home, contact the school nurse. Again, school nurses are nurses by trade. They're medically trained. They are able to make a nursing decision and provide advice. So anyone who is unvaccinated and any close contacts, again, so even if someone is vaccinated but is a close contact, if they weren't exempted, they should quarantine if they're experiencing these symptoms. So the cough, again, not due to another known cause, a sore throat when in combination with other symptoms, nausea, vomiting, diarrhea when in combination with other symptoms, headache in combination, fatigue in combination, nasal congestion when in combination from other systems. So these, again, are far more common ailments, I guess we'll call them. And again, it's a matter of multiple symptoms. It's not just one of these that you should automatically stay home. Again, out of an abundance of caution, we've always and will continue to suggest if you have a question, stay home and call the new school nurse. Let them make the decision and give you good, solid advice. I'll do that. So if an individual does test positive, it is standard. It doesn't matter what you are, who you are, vaccinated, unvaccinated. You isolate for 10 days. So if you are COVID positive, you are isolated for 10 days from the symptom onset or the PCR test. You can return after 10 days, and so it's at least 10 days, and you've been fever-free for 24 hours, and other symptoms are improving. So if it's been 11 days and they still have the fever, individual cannot return. So again, once these folks are diagnosed, there's generally, we're working with town health, public health nurses, so there's a little bit more involvement, and that is more easy to manage at that point. Someone who is an asymptomatic close contact, and they're not exempt. This is kind of like the hieroglyphics. So if you're asymptomatic and in close contact, but you weren't otherwise exempted, you can follow the test and stay protocol, or similar to last year, you can quarantine for 7 days, take a test on day 5 or later, and if you're negative, you can return on day 8. Monitor your symptoms for 14, or if you choose to do nothing, don't want to be tested, don't want to be out, anything else, no other protocol or no other exemption applies, then you have to quarantine for the full 10 days. That was where we were way back at the beginning. That was the standard. If you're a close contact, you quarantine for 10 days. All these other nuances have been refined over the last year. But if you don't want to take any of those other paths, participate in test and stay, not vaccinated, then it's going to be a standard 10-day quarantine period. So again, to make sure people understand, anyone who is symptomatic, everyone has to quarantine. So regardless of your vaccination status, if you're symptomatic and meet the qualifications in that symptom list to need to quarantine, you need to quarantine. And again, until symptoms improve, been fever-free for 24 hours, and they have a negative PCR test. So there's 2 caveats to that. So you go to the doctor, so you're a not close contact, right? So I'm just symptomatic. I've got a lot of those symptoms. It's not, I've got the sore throat, I got the fever, so I've got the multiple symptoms. I go to the doctor, I'm diagnosed with strep throat. So I have a strep throat diagnosis, regardless of the PCR test. Bring that back to the school nurse. They're likely going to let that in because those symptoms are in alignment with strep throat, and you know that diagnosis. So that's if you're not a close contact. If you were a close contact and you weren't exempt from quarantine, then when they return, they have to follow that test and stay protocol. And that's after the negative test. So that one's still one I'm trying to wrap my head around, to be honest. But that's straight out of the protocols. So lots of questions on that one. Everyone else is trying to wrap their head around that one, too.
Go ahead, Suzanne.
So a lot of the providers, meaning our pediatricians, are not using the PCR test anymore. They're using the Binax. So I had this last week. A child with fever and chills went in. They're tested, but they don't have the PCR, and they don't have COVID. So is the PCR test always going to be required, or is it going to be based on what the provider, licensed provider?
So I can tell you, I've heard that question several times, and I know the nurses are working on that because they, obviously, the nurses scientifically want to see the PCR. It's a much more accurate test, but they've heard that routinely, the same thing, that you just can't find a PCR unless you're willing to go pay $120 at Conley's. But going into the doctor's office, they're often not doing the PCR. So that is something I'll have to let you know. My guess is this will have to adjust, right? That the guidance is going to have to adjust to allow for an antigen test as well. And that seemed to be the case over the course of the spring, that it was whatever the office is providing. That if a doctor is providing a negative result, then we would have to accept the negative result. Yeah.
Go ahead, Paul.
So the test and stay is for a 7-day period, correct?
Correct.
And this says if they're a close contact, so they're quarantining now because they're not exempt, and then they follow the procedure and they test negative on day 5 and they return on day 8, because that's the procedure for testing. They're outside the test and stay window.
If they were symptomatic.
Okay.
If they were asymptomatic, they return when they meet the qualifications.
This one seems like they're saying you have to follow protocols that you're outside of already, because the test and stay was asymptomatic. If you are symptomatic, then you have to do the quarantine.
Yep.
But if you're symptomatic and you choose to quarantine and test negative on day 5, and your symptoms are gone, right? So that you're done. So what you're saying is if you're still having those symptoms, they shouldn't be coming back anyways. So they shouldn't be doing the test and stay. I mean, this isn't you. This is Desi.
Yep. Yes. I have lots of questions, and I'm waiting to get the nurses all around the table because their brains are far more effective at understanding this than mine. So yes, this is one that we need to further clarify, but this is currently what the requirement is. And this is, again, this is general, right? This is anyone who's symptomatic, and then they tease out whether you're a part of or a close contact or not. So before, I know Narissa is going to talk about the masking requirements, any questions for me? I'm not going anywhere, but before Narissa jumps into masks? No pun intended. All right.
All right, we didn't want Brian to lose his voice here, so I opted to take a turn and give him a break. So I'm going to take you through the last section of this, which is kind of the updates on masking guidance and then some data that we have. So the first slide is guidance for face covering in schools as it's come out. The first one Brian already talked about, which is for busing. That's the federal public transportation mandate that was put in place in January. So anybody who's riding public transportation has to have a face covering on. The American Academy of Pediatrics came out with guidance on July 18th, and Centers for Disease Control came out on the 5th of August. I would say for both of these, they were recommending universal masking K through 12 indoors. And I thought that was going to come more into play today, not knowing that Desi was going to revamp all the guidance that I had multiple slides on in here and had to redo over the last couple of days. So their most recent guidance is what came out technically this afternoon, but was approved yesterday. So here it is. The current expectation, which was put forward at the Board of Elementary and Secondary Education, was that all individuals in K-12 schools are required to wear masks while indoors. They're doing this through October 1st for now, so it's at least October 1st. Masks don't have to be worn outdoors, and we don't know exact details yet, but it looks like on October 1st, there will be some option to release from mask mandates based on vaccination rates. Thanks, Brian. So policy and advocacy took what are we at, 4 times since the last time we considered this, because we've been through multiple iterations. Revised mask policy and went back through it at 5:30 tonight in preparation for this meeting. So you have a revised draft that's in your packet that I believe Paul is going to take us through in a minute and just talk about what's in there. But moving on, one of the things that we heard was that 80% vaccination rate. And I know I have gotten this question about vaccination rates so many times from parents, which caused us to put in a couple of slides here on just data that we have. So Brian, if you could. So one of the things is straight from our dashboard. This is the district towns cases in the last 14 days. So you can see that we're starting to see a trend upward again here. It's been going on for about the last 3 to 4 weeks, depending on, there were like little blips and then it started to kind of trend upward in a more serious manner. It's taking us back to about where we were at in like the middle of April. So, it's something that will be updated on that dashboard and will be available to everyone as they, move into the new year. But this will give you an idea, at least of kind of the snapshot of where we're starting. And then on the right-hand side, this is taken straight from the state dashboard. So this is one that I think I've seen it multiple times in different superintendents and school committees' presentations over the last few weeks when they're talking about masking. This just shows the current case rate broken down by age group for the last 2 weeks. And I will say there is a very similar chart to this that just shows straight up cases. I opted to go with case rates here because, as you'll notice, the age groups are 0 to 4, 5 through 9, 10 to 14, 15 to 19, and then all of a sudden it jumps to 20 to 29-year-olds, which is a much bigger group. So that straight up case chart that you often see is much harder. It's muddier. When you look at rates, it tells you exactly how many individuals per age group are actually contracting COVID and testing positive. All right, and this is my giant asterisk slide. So here's the deal. We are not currently collecting vaccination information as a district. There is a state program called MIIS that some of the vaccination data is likely in already, but we don't have access to it in the process of working on that, and that would be through the school nurses that they would have access to that. There is a state level report, and that's basically what we're looking at here. So this looks at residents in specific age groups for vaccination. It is not necessarily Triton students. So there are students in these numbers that are likely attending. They could be private schools, they could be choiced out, they could be homeschooling. They're appearing in these numbers as well. And there are probably students that are residents outside our district that are choicing in, also not represented obviously in these numbers, as a Triton student. So just going through real quick, I can't break this down to Triton again because I don't know who these students are. I opted to go, when I was pulling data, with one shot. And the specific reason for that, rather than going through for fully vaccinated, was that the state in that same dashboard provides the Essex County and for total Massachusetts numbers for one shot. They don't provide those comparative numbers for fully vaccinated. So I had to stay with the one shot here in order to give you a point of comparison. So again, here's the other problem with this, is you see the age groups don't exactly match up to middle school and high school, which is who we'd love to be looking at in these numbers, and will eventually when we look at vaccination rates. But you can see that In 12 to 15, Newbury has about 65% of those individuals that are residents in their towns vaccinated. Raleigh has 61%, Salisbury has 39%. Essex County is 63%, and Massachusetts is sitting at 65%. And for 16 through 19, Newbury is at 83% of those individuals that are their residents. Raleigh is at 78%. Salisbury is at 49%. Essex County is at 69%. And Massachusetts overall is at 68%. I will say again, gigantic asterisk here, right? These are not the specific ages that we're looking for. We don't know that these are Triton students. This is as close to a number as I can kind of give you on vaccination data at this point. And we will have better vaccination data that we will be able to load into the dashboard is the plan. Eventually, it's just not, right now, this is sort of what we have. So. And that was the end for me.
I guess I would say, so that's going to be the final frontier.
Yes.
If we talk about that 80% rate and how we measure that, to be able to, on October 1st, change the masking requirement. There's still many, many questions about how we're collecting that data, other than requiring that people show proof. And without a requirement, that gets dicey.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, just hearing from other school committees today as they've kind of started to talk through this, what came out this afternoon, there's a lot of questions. Is 80% staff and students individually, or is it a staff and student collective? You know, how can you handle a regional school district? How can you handle a combined middle school, high school, which is, you know, the case that we're in. So I think there are a lot of questions I'm still waiting on DESE for.
Anybody have any quick, Paul?
You said that the only way to get the comparison was the one shot. Does that mean in that system we can see fully vaccinated for our towns?
Absolutely, yeah. So I'd initially pulled that data, and then I was looking for something to compare it to other than comparing the towns against each other, and there was nothing available. So I had to bump back to just looking at one shot. So I'd actually pulled all the fully vaccinated data, and then I will say it's not much different from what was here. It's a couple percentage points at most. And I've been tracking this data for about 3 weeks, and it is slowly ticking up. Not quickly, but it has been ticking up over the last few weeks.
Go ahead, Susan.
I would just say the one shot, the reason it's reported that way, from my understanding, is there's a strong likelihood for the second shot if you've gone one. I think it's a good, like 75 to 80% chance of likelihood that you'll have it. So.
Yeah, and I will, you know, I think when we're, I don't know what DESE is going to require. Again, is it single shot? Does that count as vaccinated, or is it a fully vaccinated that they're looking for? But I'm hopeful, you know, when we get to the point where we're really collecting data, we'll be able to produce that. We can produce for the towns this data right now. We can produce this in the dashboard for you guys to look at. Hopefully we'll eventually be able to get to what Triton itself actually looks like. We will be able to get there.
We just have to hope that they consider regional districts. That's going to be a big part of it.
Yes. I mean, we can push, you know, that's one of those things. I think we always have to be there saying, don't forget us.
Right. Okay, the next on the agenda, I'd like to move the updated policy on masking. So that would be Paul.
Okay, so obviously DESE issued guidance today that there's a mask mandate at least until October 1st. The policy update in front of you reflects that. We don't know whether that's or how that October 1st is going to change, and there are questions still to answer there. So the following requirements are in place until further notice. Obviously, there could be metrics that are given from DESE, or it could revert to a decision that we have to make to change this. But this is a mask requirement for all people in the building. Masks not required at any time outside, but in school buildings and on school transportation, even when social distancing is observed, unless one of the conditions that is outlined further in the policy are met, everybody will be wearing masks in the school buildings. Some of this is the same as what we've done before in terms of the requirements of the mask. Individuals may be excused from the requirement for the list of reasons that has been given by the CDC. Trouble breathing, unconscious, incapacitated, cannot remove the mask, or face covering without assistance. In a written note from a physician is required for a requested exemption, including those outlined in alignment with the CDC guidance. Parents may not excuse their child from the face mask requirement by signing a waiver. And when a student is determined to be exempt from wearing a mask or face covering, additional steps, including but not limited to physical barriers, increased distancing protocols, and alternate travel patterns for transitions may be instituted. So obviously, if there's individuals not wearing a mask, we'll figure out what works for that individual. And then face masks are not required when appropriate social distancing is enforced under the following conditions at the direction of a district staff member: indoor mask breaks, eating or drinking, or a single staff member is indoors in a room or space alone by themselves. Obviously, we have the quarantining and close contact, and those are different social distancing distances, so we have not specified exactly what that distance is in the policy, and that may change as well at a given moment's notice from either DESE or elsewhere. So this allows us to stay current with whatever the expectations are. And then face masks are supposed to be provided by the student's family, but the district will supply disposable face coverings for individuals who arrive at a building or board school transportation without one. If students are in violation of this policy, the student will be deemed ineligible to attend school in such time as they can comply with the requirement or the requirement is listed. Much like if a student goes to the nurse and has a fever of 101, they're not supposed to be in the building for 24 hours after that. Same sort of requirement here. And visitors, this policy will impact visitors to the building as well. Any questions on that policy?
So can I add one piece, just the language? So it is the above references, they're individual sentences rather than paragraphs. It says, if students are in violation of this policy, the student will be deemed ineligible to attend school until such time as they can comply with the requirement or the requirement is lifted. So this was one of the other things that we were hoping for a little more guidance in the document that came out today. And it kicked the can on the October 1st discussion, and the document basically says, it's up to local control, talk to your attorney. So the Council for the Mass School Association of School Superintendents drafted a long opinion with lots of case references and such. But in essence, it came down to, this is a condition of attending school. This should not be a disciplinary matter. This is no different than meeting the minimum requirements of residency and the regular vaccination requirements. So that terminology, where it says, let me turn it over, that it shall be deemed ineligible to attend school, there was several words he said you could use. That one, I think, makes the most sense. So this isn't about, will there be disciplinary issues? I'm sure it will come to that at some point. But ideally, we're talking about this as masks as required at the state level by this draft policy. It is a condition of attending and working for the Triton Public Schools, and so it has to be treated as such. So I just want to clarify that.
Maureen?
So we talked about, it talks about visitors, Brian, but will this also include pre-K? Because I know you mentioned earlier that pre-K is not typically in the jurisdiction of
Yeah, so that question came up. My recommendation is certainly, that was a recommendation to keep it, all students and staff, visitors, so it's everyone in the schools. I suppose there could be an argument if you had a separate early childhood center. Some towns have, preschools are separate. Given that these are within our building, same students mingling with our teachers and staff, I don't think there's really a valid argument to say that they shouldn't be included.
Okay, but it doesn't need to specify in the policy that this includes pre-K.
I think, right, so because we are a pre-K through 12 district,
Yeah.
you have a policy that says all students, basically everyone, right? Whether you're a visitor, a student, staff, or otherwise, unless you meet one of those exemptions, a staff member sitting in her or his own office or space, if you don't meet one of those qualifications or exemptions, then you're wearing a mask.
Okay, thank you.
Nerissa?
So I just wanted to note, because I know this has been kind of a common thing that we've done, that Brian, Kim, Kyle, Maureen, and I met with the data review group this morning. We did not go through this language in particular, but we went through all of the ideas that kind of sit behind it, and they were in full agreement that that was the right way to move forward. So, and my other question for you, Brian, is I'm assuming that when a motion is made, it should be made as of a certain date because you'll need time to communicate this change. What should that date be?
I may or may not have just sent my email with that exact same question. So there are not a lot of individuals, right? We still, educators were hanging on to summer. We had new staff here this week, but as of Monday, everyone's returning. The mandate that the commissioner issued says effective immediately. So I guess that's a personal preference. I don't have any issue with communicating this tomorrow and making that a requirement. It's not something we're going to penalize people tomorrow, but I think that given the fact that the state mandate is effective immediately, I think it should be effective immediately, and we'll work our way up towards it so that everyone knows that by Monday and by Friday, really. I mean, I don't think anyone got rid of all their masks as evidenced here tonight. So I don't think it'll be a big stretch at this point.
Okay.
But thank you for the...
No other questions? Can I have a motion to approve any changes to policy EBCFA, face coverings, or policy EBC supplemental, other COVID-related issues, as may be determined and approved by the school committee, effective immediately?
I'll make a motion to approve the changes to policy EBCFA, face coverings as presented.
Second the motion.
Any discussion? All those in favor? Okay, moving back up to COVID-19 dashboard.
I was going to say, before we move on, you have another policy that's on there. I know that, I don't know who's talking about it, but.
I was going to say, I know we talked about this last time. That's the EBC supplemental. So that is a MASC draft policy that just, in summary, over 8 pages, just basically says, if COVID impacts these policies, the committee and the superintendent have the authority to make adjustments, whether it's placements or enrollments, some things that may conflict. So when the group met a week ago, everyone agreed, we'll just leave that one alone. It still just basically says if any of these are impacted, we have the authority, but I don't think there's any edits to make. So I think that was where everyone was, yeah.
So moving, the next item on the agenda is COVID-19 dashboard 2021-2022.
And I'm going to apologize for this. I didn't check the printed version. I just sent in the PDF. In the printed version, the bottom gets cut off. Is there any chance you have the original PDF, Brian, that you could bring up electronically? Yeah, sure, absolutely. So we started talking about, to go way back, I guess, I think everybody knows at this point that we have a COVID dashboard. It contains a variety of data, both district, local, state level. Paul Mayette has been instrumental in kind of creating that and making sure it gets updated. We have been talking since the end of last year, I think, about how to how to make that kind of represent the spot that we're in right now. So obviously with summer programming, things were a little bit different. And now we're coming into an age where we have things like the vaccination data available. So we did a quick mock-up of what a new dashboard could look like. Yes. And know that the data in this is representative. Some of it is data that we had. Some of it is data that is not real. You'll see some funky stuff that's going on in here. But if Brian could go, yeah, there you go, all the way to the top. So at the top, we're taking out some of the top language there. This is a proposal. We're looking for your feedback on it. In the first box, it used to end just to the right of where it says the close contact header over there. So staff to quarantine and students to quarantine is something that's new. And this represents the fact that we may have close contacts that aren't required to quarantine. They could be people who are fully vaccinated and asymptomatic. They could be people who are students who are doing test and stay. You know, there are going to be, essentially there's going to be a difference here that didn't exist in the past. So the idea is to track that. The current proposal that we worked out together was to separate that and differentiate staff versus students, just because we felt like that was an important distinction because it affects the way the schools function. But that's kind of part one of this proposal. If you could scroll down a little bit, Brian. So these are existing ones from last year that are staying in. So it's classes in schools currently remote and close contacts from community cases and quarantining for symptoms, which was self-reported. So these were individuals that called the nurse and said, you know, I was a close contact from my gymnastics team. I'm letting you know that I'm going to be out of school for the next 10 days. And if you can scroll down, we're leaving new cases in the district's town for the last 14 days. I know this is one that's been referred to, and Massachusetts daily new cases as well is staying. This is, again, representative data. So this is sort of a timeline of that one-shot data that you were looking at. Right now it has the 3 towns sitting in there for 12 to 15 and 16 to 19 age groups. Obviously, that could change to be middle school, high school, or something like that as we kind of move along in the vaccination process. So this is an ad. And then there's actually nothing below this. Below it used to be we called it the stoplight chart. That was probably not the term everyone else used for it. But it was federal response to COVID, state response to COVID, contact tracing time, testing turnaround time. I think there were a few things in there. It was subjective rather than objective, which was kind of problematic for us last year. But it also, especially with contact tracing, you probably saw cases over the last year. Our contact tracers would have 3 cases one day and they would have 13 the next. And they would very quickly go from kind of it's manageable to, oh my gosh, I'm in over my head, calling in extra people to help them out with contact tracing. It's really hard to manage. They shouldn't be responsible to reporting back to us every time that changed. They should be focusing on that contact tracing. So in this mock-up, we've actually removed the stoplight chart and pulled that out of this. So we're looking for feedback in that we would like to change this once and hopefully not make major changes again for at least a few months to come, because you know, having that stability of data, that consistency, I think is important as people look at this and try to, you know, kind of make sense of the data that's in here. So is there data in here that's been added that you don't feel is important? Because there is time equity, I would say, from a variety of individuals in making sure that this gets updated. And is there anything not in this dashboard that you would like to see? Maureen?
Well, I like that you added the staff and students and separated it out, because I feel like that was asked a lot last year, so I like that. I'm just curious if in the vaccine percentages, as we move into the school year, if it's worth putting in just Triton District as a whole. I
Yes.
mean, I know we're not collecting vaccine
Exactly.
information, but as Desi's talking about reaching percentages,
Yeah,
that maybe at some point that
right.
would have to get added, because that's something people are, if that's the direction that we head,
Yes.
parents are going to be paying attention to that.
Absolutely. So yeah, I think there's a couple of ways that we can handle that vaccination data. We can put in what we have right now and then add actual middle school, high school data after, as it comes available, if we want to do that. So it would be just, a line that starts sort of later in the graph. We can leave vaccinations off for now and simply not put in any data at all. And once we start to get some solid district data, so we feel like we have a good response for those who have been vaccinated, then that chart could be added. I think there are approaches, and I guess that's where we were looking for input tonight to say, how do you want this to work, and what would you like to see here?
Erin?
I just wanted to comment on the point that Narissa just made. I feel more comfortable putting data out there about vaccination rates when it applies to our students in our situation, and not putting data out there that's going to mislead people as to what the current status is of our particular situation. I don't want somebody to take a look at the website and say, well, on your website or on your dashboard, you're showing X, when it doesn't really apply to us, and they're using that as a standard.
So I guess I would look to the committee then and say, should we just hold off on putting in vaccination data until we get a clarification from DESE on exactly what vaccination data they're going to be looking for, because that's important as well, right? We don't want to be looking at one-shot data and then not fully vaxxed, or whatever the situation happens to be. And then, do you want to see that chart all of a sudden appear? Is that the way people would like to make this happen?
Well, that's going to be the most important data that parents are going to want to see,
Okay.
if it's capable of us getting that
So-
information.
Sorry,
Yeah.
Amanda.
No, go
I do
ahead.
think it's important to show the data, but I just want to make sure that it really applies to us before we start sharing it.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Can we put a note there for now that, like, this data is not reflective of Triton High School? It's
Yeah, or we
something like, Triton Middle School and High School, or some sort of note, and then shift and make a big email out, we're now gathering data specific to Triton. I don't know. I mean, it seems like we do want to see this vaccination data because it's going to be close to what we've got maybe, but, or at least let parents know that we're going to be tracking it.
And we could even put in a text placeholder that says, vaccination data coming soon here.
Yeah.
And just put it in a box. And then that box later becomes a chart.
I guess I would say I think it's worthwhile waiting to know exactly what the expectation is from DESE and how they're going to be reporting it, because this is by school, right? It's a school. Once they reach that threshold, that school could be released from the mask mandate. So regardless of what the decision is, I think you'd be wise to just hang on before you start publishing vaccine data until we know, right? You want to know end zone to end zone what the playing field is before you start putting information out there.
Yep.
I like the idea of a box that just says coming soon, vaccine data.
Can I just ask a question? So you're saying that it's possible that we could get to a point where we have one elementary school that doesn't have to mask anymore, and another elementary school that might have to mask because they...
Yeah, according to everything that's been said in the document today, is it's once the school has reached 80% students and staff.
Okay, and
Then-
so...
That are vaccinated, though. Students
Fully
and staff
vaccinated.
that are fully vaccinated. So at the elementary level, until the vaccine's
Right.
available, it's going to be.
Well, right, yes.
Right, but
So,
someday
I
down the
mean,
road, yes,
middle
one
school,
could
high school
be-
are going to have to be considered one school because they're transported together, so...
Yeah, actually, we had that question. I think we probably could make the argument for both successfully, that it should be or it should be separate schools. But potentially, yes, there's a potential that it could be considered one school or
I
two
mean,
separate schools.
they move through this, they all move through the same building, so,
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah, I think there's a lot we don't know. And
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
the hardest piece of this right now, right, is we can do whatever we want, but it might be wrong if we don't wait. But if we wait, I know there are going to be people calling us and saying, why isn't this data here?
But I think if you don't know the purpose yet, right? So what is the data? We are putting it out there to answer something. If we don't know yet what we're answering, I think putting the placeholder, we got you, right? We get it. We can't answer it yet. So
Yeah.
we're getting there. But we have a lot more clarity, right, even down to the MIS data and what we're able to extract from that. It's a question to be answered.
So couldn't you just put, like, perhaps the county information and the state information and just make a note saying that, you know, once we have clarification on what we need to be,
So the problem is, going back to what Erin just said, she said fully vaccinated. We don't know it's going to be fully vaccinated. It could be one shot. And
oh,
so what I have here is one shot data because that's all I have access to right now.
right.
I don't know that that's going to be what DESE opts to look at on a per school basis in the long run,
Okay.
which is what, you know, again, it's just tough because it sticks you in the corner. So I guess, and then my other question is, if we do want to hold off and come into this down the road and have kind of those separate lines for the various groups, do you want to see it over time? Is that something that we want to, should it be a chart so that it's looking like what Brian has there right now, where we can literally list the school and what the percentage is? Or do you want it, like we have the mock-up in there, which is one of the reasons why we put a mock-up in there, and have it look at, that's only 3 weeks of data, so obviously it's not, you know, it's not giving you a good picture of what it could look like long-term, but those, in theory, should be progressing up over time. Do you want to, yeah, exactly. Do you want to see? No. Let's not do that. So I guess that's the other question, is do you want to see that over time, or do you want to see that a snapshot with numbers of where we are in the given week? And I should say, at least right now, I'm assuming we'll be able to pull data from MIS more frequently. Right now, this comes out weekly on Thursdays, the data that I'm pulling. So,
Susanna?
I just said my input would be to trend the data, to definitely trend it as, and have a gap to goal stat there. So if our goal is 80% or whatever it's deemed to be, by school, by table-wise anyway. I think a line sometimes is hard to visualize unless you've got, you know, where the benchmark is, I guess, is also something to consider putting in.
okay.
Yeah.
Yep. Everybody's pointing at somebody else.
Go ahead, Paul.
I was just going to say, it may be that the nature of the data also determines that question for us.
Anybody else?
I was just going to say, I don't want to make it a logistical nightmare to update it, but I mean, it's good to show the progress that's being made.
Pauline?
Should that second box down on the left, should we get rid of that? On the dashboard? Talks about remote, schools remote.
You're on mute, Brian.
I remember asking that question, and you said that you thought it was the same. But I don't ever went beyond that.
I think I gave you bad advice if that's what I said. I don't think there's a reason for that to be there. I thought we said no to that, but.
So Brian, before you go and do that, you did say that if you have a class that's quarantining, would they be, if there's an opportunity to get the stuff back in place, if we're finding out that this is becoming a problem and you are able to get a classroom that is quarantining to be able to participate remotely, you would want to have that tracked, right?
Yes, but I would say let's add that back then, because right now, that's inaccurate. That's not a possibility,
Gotcha.
right? And I think, Paul, you're the wizard here, right? You can keep a version and quickly restore it, so he doesn't have to rebuild the dashboard. Yeah, so for now, without it being an option, I don't think it should be there. Yeah.
So I just have one more question. Brian, has there been any discussion with the lawyers in Boston about having the staff be mandated vaccinated?
I have not had discussion with our council. I know some districts are playing with that. I have a text string going around literally as we speak. Have you attempted to require it yet? And most people are saying no, they haven't gone down that avenue. Generally, the districts that are attempting to require it are larger with more resources and legal teams. So I think that I can tell you that there's been some polling done, not by me formally, but across staff and groups, and there is I would say a majority of folks who are okay with it. So I don't think it would be entirely dead on arrival, but it has not been broached yet.
So what I'm seeing in the listservs that I'm part of legally is that the lawyers that are doing employment law are saying essentially that there's no basis not to discharge. That's the wrong way to put it. That the employers are free to put in this requirement, this mandate, that you either get vaccinated or go work elsewhere. That's what I'm seeing in my circle, so I just wanted to share that with you.
Okay. Good to know. Thank you.
Any other questions? I just have a comment to make that, once again, it's the Department of Ed waiting to the 12th hour to give us this guidance. I mean, in the spring, they said absolutely there would be no guidance for masks in the fall, and now here we are. And now we have to wait until October 1st before they give us more guidance. So unfortunately for parents at home, this is the way it's been through the whole pandemic. The Department of Ed has let us down every single time. So we don't have to vote on the dashboard. So the next item on the agenda is the DCC discussion review. Brian?
So we had a discussion with the DCC about a comprehensive facilities assessment that was completed actually close to 2 years ago now. It was done in the fall of 19. The final report was issued in December of 19. It was due to be presented to us. They were ready in February to present. We said, let's just hold off and get through budget season. Budget season ended on March 11th, and we closed the schools on March 13th, 2 days later. So it sat for 2 years. We had the report recosted. And so it's the report that was presented. It shows a list of $58 million worth of repairs. It's a big number. Obviously, the towns saw that, and I would say that was concerning to them. We said multiple times, and we'll say it again, that this is a starting point in the discussion. This is a necessary first step for us to get a sense of what the scope is of the work. This is not, we talked about it that night, this is not a feasibility study. Those in Rowley and Pine Grove know what a feasibility study is. That's a much more formal, comprehensive study of how to solve the problems, alternatives to solve problems, spaces. Is it cheaper to just move the school? So this was not a feasibility study. This was relatively small scale engineers and architects coming in, walking this building stem to stern. As you see in the report, you all had copies of the report, took pictures of everything, and noted all the deficiencies. They didn't say, hey, you could improve this by such and such. It was simply, here's the cost to fix everything that's broken. So obviously the discussion caused some concern for the towns. Obviously this is a big price tag. So the words I used were, again, this is the start of a discussion, and the next step is for us to determine how the towns would like to address this. I mean, we've known that these issues have been building over time. The original building came online in 1971, I think is what he said. It was built in late 60s and opened in 71. Which actually means, that's right, this is the 50th anniversary this year of the Triton Regional School District. So there are things that have quite literally been an issue since this building was renovated. He mentioned, Kevin Preventure was the architect who came out and presented. He said this is not about lack of maintenance and upkeep. This is about the age of the building. Right behind us here, these windows that are in this section of the building, they kept all the original steel and put double pane glass in there. But that's not what you do with steel windows. That was what was done. He was very cautious to not try and knock his peers. But I think in essence, there were decisions made 25 years ago when doing this renovation that at the time seemed like good ideas. I don't want to judge because I wasn't there, but now they need to be remedied again. So the real discussion is, do the towns want to, or the towns need to engage, and we need to engage them in a discussion about how best to solve this. Is it something where we put together a capital plan for 10 years and fund this piecemeal? There are obviously items that he brought forward that are critical, should be addressed right away, and others that we have some time to deal with. And the alternative that we laid out was if we wanted to partner with the MSBA on some type of solution, whether that's a renovation or there were comments raised at the meeting about building a new building with maybe some different motives. But regardless of what the plan is, if we partner with the MSBA, there's a rough estimate assumption that they're going to pay for half of it. So if we spent double the amount of money and did a full renovation stem to stern on this building, still paid the same amount of money and bonded over years and had the state pay for the other half of it, there's some wisdom there. So the next step is really to get around the table with the towns and talk about realistically how we attack this. So that's, any questions? I know several of you were there. But I think we want to just put it on the agenda to note it, and certainly I think I think a DCC agenda could be and should be entirely consumed with this one topic, to schedule a special meeting for this sometime in September. I should say, we had talked at the meeting about what the cost would be to conduct a true feasibility study. So if we wanted to go down the path of engaging with the MSBA, the first step would be the towns committing to complete a real feasibility study to say, okay, what is the best way to solve this problem? Is it just to fix it, or is there a better, more cost-effective way to do that? A typical feasibility study is for a building this size would be in the $1 million to $1.5 million range. And that would be something that the towns would have to commit to up front. So, any
Does
questions?
anybody have any questions?
Anyone that wasn't there, or?
Would you be able to get that number so that at a next DCC meeting, we could make that, to let them know how much it would be?
Absolutely, yeah, yep.
Maureen?
I was just going to ask Brian, it's more a question for the general public that might be watching and interested. This is not on our website,
Nope,
correct?
it is not yet.
So if somebody's watching and they're interested in finding out, this is a pretty comprehensive
Yes.
document.
Yep.
How do they get it?
Absolutely, if they want to contact me, we can absolutely get them a copy of that. Yep, and we can actually get that loaded onto the website.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
All right.
I should just, while I said the word website, we've been talking about a new website for 1.5 years. That's one of those other things that has just not happened because of COVID. So we are on track. We are reviewing a final revision on Monday, and with the start of the school year, should be launching a new website as well. Much more click-friendly.
The next item on the, sure.
I wanted to make actually a comment, I guess, rather than a question. So I know when we were talking about it last Thursday, the kind of consensus was that this wasn't something that was coming to the towns in the spring. But I just, from a school committee's perspective, I think the biggest concern for me in all that list, and one that I think about of this building even more than my own house every time it rains, is the roof. My take on this was there are things that we can put off, but I think the roof needs to be sooner than later. And I know that the people invested in this building most, right, are the people in this room. And I think my just take on this was that when we come back together and discuss, one of the things that I wanted to express to them just as an individual member is that I feel like the roof needs to be given some priority. If they're going to talk about a longer term project, we can't wait so long that the roof ends up becoming a larger problem than it already is. That's something that, regardless of what the scope of it is, we can't let, is it going to be a small project? Is it going to be a big project? Kick around for 3 years, because we're going to be in dire straits, I think. The roof just is not, it's already got problems, and it's getting worse progressively, I think. And I just between leaks even over this summer, when we came in here and there were trash cans in the lobby, and the membrane having pulled up when we have high winds, I just think, from my perspective, I wanted to voice that needs to be one of our top priorities. Windows, definitely. There are other things on that list that he listed as safety concerns, like steps that are starting to wear away, or are worn away, I should say, the loading docks, things like that. But the roof, to me, is topmost in my mind on that list, and I don't think it can wait that too long.
That'll just be things that we bring up in the DCC meetings. The next item on the agenda is the summer programming update.
So I'm going to stop talking. I asked Kim and Shannon to give just a verbal update on, we talked a lot about leading up to the summer, and then in writing provided what the programs were going to be. So I thought it'd be helpful to hear how they went now that it's past tense.
So we had over 300 participants throughout the summer attending our elementary or middle school summer program. At the high school, it was a credit recovery program, and there were 35 students that took approximately 60 courses. Some of those courses were offered online. Some of them had more than one course that they had to attend to get the credit that they needed to move on to the next grade level or to graduate. A huge shout out to our teacher leaders who took on a new role this summer. 3 out of the 5 were part of the CAGS program that is being sponsored through Salem State. And so it was really great to see them coming to work and asking a lot of different questions. And as Kyle knows firsthand, Dan Boyle became very close with the transportation department, with all of the transporting of the students at different stops at different times of the summer. So that was just exciting to see them experience school in a different way. And they had a great appreciation for their principals, I would say, at the end of the program. The programs, at least again, elementary and middle school, really combine the academics along with some project-based learning. We had 2 productions, one at Pine Grove and one at Salisbury, that were musicals that the kids were able to participate in. We had some community projects. One at the middle school was a community service project where they actually built beds for the Massachusetts Coalition for Homeless students. So they really had an opportunity to do a lot of different activities outside of academics, but there was that element where the academics were integrated into the projects and the tasks that they were doing. For next year, looking ahead, I would say the programming was really solid. We would love to see more middle school students involved. That was our lowest enrollment number. So that was a little discouraging because they all worked really hard, but we were hoping for a better turnout at that particular age level. But we will continue to work to promote the program, and I think because we had successes last year, and anybody who participated at the elementary level, even the older kids, as they transition to the middle school, giving them an experience that they had at the elementary school and really talking it up, and if they had a positive experience, then hopefully they will continue to show interest at the upper grades. And before I just pass it on to Shannon, just to say that although this was the summer program, we really had about 3 or 4 different programming that was running, and the kids did not have to just stay with one program. So if you came in and you had special ed services for a chunk of time, you would then be able to go and join the other programs that were going on. So it was a lot of in and out of classrooms and attendance and all of that fun stuff. So I'll pass it on to Shannon.
Thank you. So for the special ed program, we had students could either attend the ESY program, which was the daily program. They came in all day. We had tutoring also, and some students attended both. So for the ESY program, we had about, it was K through 12 in 18 to 22, and we had about an 88% attendance rate each day, which was really good. The tutoring was not as consistent. Some students were choosing other activities to go to, or families were vacationing. So the tutoring wasn't as consistent, but the daily ESY program had pretty good attendance. For the elementary program, Becky Bebo and Amy Mansfield ran that program, and they had, so some of the highlights were they really worked hard to integrate the social aspect of the program in with the academics. The kids were able to start their day outside every day. As you know, there was a lot of rain, so we did purchase some activities and games for the program to be able to use year after year. The students took on some leadership roles for the program, such as helping out, handing out lunch, taking attendance, working with Becky and Amy to move through the schools, through the classrooms. And the Newbury Fire Department came twice with their trucks and their hoses, and the kids were able to run through the water on a really hot day, and that was excellent. That was actually, both programs were able to participate in that, so that was a highlight, especially for the students and the teachers too. And then the middle school and 18 to 22 ESY program was run by Eric McCarthy and Rebecca Tikijian, and they did a lot of community outings. So the students did self-defense, they went to the grocery store weekly, they took art lessons. Our 18 to 22 program had their art put up in the Hamilton Wenham Library, and they were able to go and look at their art and see it hanging in the library, which was really a highlight for them. They worked a lot on employment skills, such as following a daily schedule, interacting with other students. They advocated for their needs, and just socializing and working with their peers. At the end of the program, both the middle school and high school had ended their program and celebrated together at the Morning Buzz, where they were able to, work on practicing the social skills they had learned and just celebrate the summer. So it was a success, and I know Sandy Susi worked very hard to put both programs together, and I heard from many people what a great job she did. So because of her help, both programs ran really well.
Is there any questions? Narissa?
I just asked one. Shannon, you mentioned that that tutoring at the elementaries wasn't attended as well as you were hoping for. Are there going to be supports for those students that didn't get the help that clearly it was believed that they needed as they're moving into the fall semester?
Yeah, right when the students come in, we'll assess them, and definitely the principals will work with the teachers and the interventionists to make sure that those students, if they regressed, or that they receive what they need.
Okay, thank you.
No other questions? Next item on the agenda is the monthly personnel report.
So normally this would be the superintendent's report. Obviously, all I've been doing is getting ready for the school year to open, so we kind of covered that in the first hour of me talking. But you do have the monthly personnel report in there. So just to note, it's huge. Lots of resignations and retirements over the course of the last 3 to 6 months. So there's been a lot of new hires as well. So certainly if there's any questions anyone has, I'm happy to answer them. But that is the standard report, just a little longer than usual.
Marissa?
I know, surprise, right? This is just a question. And it may not even be accurate, but I had heard from some Salisbury parents at the elementary school that some of those students had gotten TBAs instead of a teacher assignment. Do you know if there are positions yet to be filled there, or?
Yes, I want to say that Maureen gave me 2 or 3 packets today with letters, I believe, from Salisbury for those hires. So they're literally being finalized as we speak.
Okay, perfect.
Yes.
So we have essentially everything, every position
Yes.
needed to go. Okay.
Yeah, so there were, I should have noted that. So there were a lot of, we'll call them late in the game moves. So that was folks who retired late, decided to retire late. Instructional assistants, I would say specifically, a lot of resignations over the course of the summer. And at Salisbury, there were a couple teachers who moved on to different positions that created those vacancies a week and a half ago, 2 weeks ago. So yeah, there are definitely far more TBAs going on. I know Pine Grove had the same issue. I don't think Newbury had any current TBAs, but far more TBAs on those student lists than we like to see. But yeah.
All right, thank you. That was my only question.
Paul, did you have a question? Okay.
I believe we're good now. I'm pretty sure, we'll check with the principals again tomorrow, but I'm sure those packets, it was 5 more that I signed today that were new hire packets. So I'm pretty sure, and Kyle's nodding too. Yeah, pretty sure we're getting close if we're not there yet.
Okay, the next item on the agenda is the
Excuse me, I
student
have a
handbooks.
question.
Oh, I'm sorry,
Question.
Paul.
That's all
Go
right.
ahead, Paul.
So, Madam Chair, this is actually a question for you, and I don't want to put you on the spot, but you're the oldest person here besides me. But so what does it take to get invited to Convocation around here? That's what I want to know. For 10 years, I've never been invited. I don't think anybody on the school committee's ever been invited.
Paul, that's not true. You get a letter in the mail, and at any time.
For Convocation?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I got to pay
Did you
attention to my
get
mail.
that?
Yeah.
I received mine.
All right.
Should be in the mail. Yeah, that was mailed
I got to
out.
come and see the
And every
motivational
year
speech this year.
Right, but every year we have that, and you're invited anytime that you want.
You're kidding?
Always.
Wow, okay.
Yeah.
I've been to a few myself.
Yeah.
What's that?
I've been to a few myself.
Have you? Is he good?
Brian,
Did you feel motivated? I mean, when he gets through talking, you do want to just go out and conquer the world?
absolutely.
Okay.
He's here all night, folks.
I mean, it's also great to see the teachers who have been here a long time, that they get those golden apples.
Yeah, so that is Monday. You're obviously welcome to attend. It's going to be outside. We're doing it in the stadium. I may or may not be checking the weather every 2 hours and perseverating on that, but as of right now, it looks good. So everyone can be together, all 425-ish employees. Breakfast at 8:30, 9 o'clock will start. By 10:15, we'll be wrapped up and teachers will be on their way and everyone will be on their way off to their buildings for meetings and such, but you are absolutely more than welcome to attend.
So Paul, I'll personally invite you.
This is it. I got it now. I've heard it. We're golden.
The next item on the agenda is the student handbooks.
So you haven't, well, maybe you don't have the printed versions in front of you. So Maureen does. So there was lots of discussions about major edits to these, and ultimately at the end of the day, There are some things that we would like to change. Those didn't get edited for this rendition. I want to thank Paul Mayette, phenomenal editor. So there's a lot of changes that were made throughout these, as I pointed out. Some gender neutral, making it a little more accessible. She and he became they. Parents became parents and guardians. So a lot of that correction just universally throughout. All of the routine, there was some actual grammar, and semantics edits. All of the usual routine information, staff list, school year, calendar, all of that was updated. Two things that need to be updated. There's now a note in there that the policy that you revised on masking will be in all the handbooks. We'll edit that and get that included. And then the second piece was a dress code. And I don't know if, Kim, if you want to mention anything about if you want to speak to this, but we added a district wellness coordinator this year. Obviously, as you know, Kara Briley was hired and has done, we have to have her come and do a report because it's amazing the amount of work that she's done and things are rolling. But this actually started with a discussion about the student dress code. It actually was some sixth grade students at Newbury Elementary that brought up the topic, and it was a great discussion. And so we went down the path of trying to just tweak the dress codes to be a little bit more gender neutral, a little more 2021. And the task of slight little tweaks just didn't work, right? There was no, I don't believe that policy, the dress codes have been touched in decades. So ultimately, at the end of the day, what we tried to do in making tweaks was not fruitful. So we all agreed that it needed to be a much larger discussion. And to have that much larger discussion, we need to involve certainly students who are old enough to engage in that discussion, and families and teachers and administrators. So we're going to embark on that process. So the dress code did not change at all, but we have a pathway forward to be having a working group that we will arrive at a dress code policy that by the end of this year will have been fully vetted with the entire community, have had a conversation about what, where, when, and why. And then that would be included in next year's handbook. That doesn't need to wait until next year's handbook to change. If we're ready in January, there's no reason we can't issue an amendment to the handbook. But we wanted to make sure that we did this right and followed a good inclusive process. So ultimately, you just have a note in the handbooks now, or we have a note in the handbooks just saying no changes, but expect that we're going to be making some changes over the course of this year. Other than that, the handbooks are pretty much the same as they were last year.
Make a motion to approve the 2021-2022 student handbooks as presented.
Second the motion.
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Thank you very much. Can I just add one more little caveat? So those of you who've been around a while, there's always been a debate about whether handbooks, this is for the newer members, should be, is it the school committee's authority or the superintendent's authority? There are some superintendents who have very strong opinions on this. I personally believe that your voting these is a good thing because it gives the weight of policy. So when you vote to approve these documents, you are approving this as a policy, if you will, by which students at each school need to adhere to be eligible to attend school. So there's a value on that. It's not just a simple boilerplate, here's the handbooks and thanks for looking at them.
The next item on the agenda is the subcommittee reports and action items. Policy, I believe, has already...
I think you heard from us and what we've done the last couple of weeks. Next meeting is September 22nd, prior to our full committee meeting, and I expect we will be continuing much of the same.
Finance Subcommittee.
We wanted to bring to your attention, it's in the packet somewhere buried in this pile, so apologize. Kyle came up with a way to maximize the revolving, am I saying this correctly?
Yep, so we,
Yep.
we chatted about where the budget standing was, the standing of the revolving funds, with the deficits that occurred during the year, and then what types of reserves were appropriate in each of those revolving funds and what that meant for E&D.
So those, we met last week. So those documents we agreed deserved a spot on the agenda.
Thank you.
We weren't sure how long this would be tonight, so we decided this week wasn't the week. So the, what's the next month? September 22nd meeting, we'll actually call that out. It'll be, the routine reports will be there, but it'll also be an opportunity for Kyle to go into much more detail with you with the documents in front of you, so you can see exactly what we're proposing, because it has long-term ramifications. Yeah.
Did we discuss putting it on September 11th for a first look and then the full discussion on the 22nd?
Yeah, so that's true. Yes, we talked about talking about it at the workshop, and then having a full discussion on the 22nd. Yes.
And personnel.
Yep, that's it. And our next meeting's the 21st, if anyone's interested.
And personnel and negotiations.
So we don't have a meeting presently scheduled, but the next thing that we're going to be doing on the personnel and negotiation, we're going to be meeting with the cafeteria workers, Brian. Once we get back into school, we're going to be negotiating with them, is my understanding.
Correct. So the AFSCME contracts were up on July 1st. We late, but we did agree with the Unit A and B custodians. I expect that we'll be hearing from the cafeteria workers within the next week. And then the other thing on the docket for this coming year is the Public Employee Committee to negotiate health care.
Okay.
So we'll be starting that by October.
Sounds good.
And the next item on the agenda is the correspondence from Crest Collaborative. Just making.
So that's just a note. That's the annual report, and it's certified and submitted to the committees by Jim, the treasurer. So certainly happy to answer any questions if you have them. I am your representative to the Crest and North Shore Consortium boards, here at your service.
Our next meeting will be the workshop on September 11th. I also want to thank, Paul Mayette and Narissa for the work that they did on the dashboard, and thank the P&A for, at last minute, going over the mask policies. It takes all of us to make sure that we keep this committee going, and I appreciate each and every one of you for all the work that you do. Can I have a motion to adjourn?
Go ahead, Paul Lees.
Make a motion to adjourn?
I'll second.
Any discussion? All those in favor? Thank you. Have a nice night.